Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee.
To In Session. I'm your host, Dr. Farid Holakouee, and I'll be with you for the next hour here on Radio Hamra. Joining me tonight is a very special guest who I'll introduce to you shortly. Before I do, you can follow me on Twitter or Instagram or like my page on Facebook to get updates on the show or suggest topics or books for the program. And the shows are uploaded at the end of each week to my SoundCloud page and podcasts on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. But let me introduce you to my guest tonight. I'm very honored and excited to introduce to you Jerome Dixon. I'll share you a little bit about him, but let him share his story with you all. So, Jerome, as a high school junior, was arrested by the Oakland Police Department as a suspect in a murder investigation. Unconnected to the crime, he was questioned without parental notification. After 25 hours of police interrogation, he was then coerced into signing an incriminating statement. This statement was used against him in a court of law, despite the initial judge's ruling to the contrary and his subsequent denial of having committed this crime. He is now known to the state of California as a term lifer. 21 years later, at his 2001 parole hearing, after numerous appeals to lawyers, journalists, and judicial stewards, the California Prison Parole Board had difficulty comprehending the facts surrounding his incarceration. They acknowledged his claim of innocence and released him from their custody in October of 2011. Since his release, he's been advocating adamantly for social reform, motivational speaking at local high schools, and working as a project manager for a construction company that specializes in commercial and residential development. And he's also been pivotal in helping to bring about some legislation to help people so that no one has to go through what he has gone through. Jerome, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me.
So I shared your story in kind of a snapshot, but within that snapshot, there's so much. And tonight, I'm looking forward to hearing you. I've heard your story myself, but to sharing with the listeners about what you went through as really a child, 17 years old. You're still a teenager, not even an adult, but things that changed your life forever, and how you have overcome so much to now help others as well. So, maybe we can just get into what you went through. Take us back to being a 17-year-old and what you experienced back in Oakland.
Before I get into that,
Sure.
I think it's very important that I say to the listening audience, I would like the listening audience to put themselves in my shoes.
Mm-hmm.
I want the listening audience to, for the mothers out there, think of me as your child. Think of me as your brother. Think of me as your nephew. And once you embrace that, then you could see what I went through. So in July of 1990, I was a 17-year-old, typical child, rebellious, thought he knew the world. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Mm-hmm. And a murder occurred, and the police detained me. They put me in the patrol car, and they drove me to the immediate crime scene, which was probably about 2 blocks away. Once I arrived at the crime scene, I could see that there was a large presence of, there was a large police presence.
Mm-hmm. And you have no idea what's going on at this point?
No, but I did see that there was a body laying on the ground. And I remember as I peered over the hood of the patrol car as I was in the back seat, I saw this individual laying on his back with his mouth open. And there was a large trail of blood running from his body. The individual was shot in the head with a shotgun. And so the sergeant came to the door and he said to me, young man, you have a lot of explaining to do about that dead body. I said, officer, I don't know what you're talking about. And he said, are you sure that's the game you want to play? So be it. He slammed the door. He then drove me to the police station downtown. Once I arrived at the station, they put me in a small little room. The room was probably big enough to hold one long table and 3 chairs. And I remained in that room for 25 hours.
Wow. 25 hours.
That's a day plus an
Yeah,
hour.
and I can only imagine. And I think what was very important, what you said, to ask people to put themselves in their shoes or to imagine that we're talking about a family member. Um, and I think that's something that we'll get to probably later on, is that, of course, I'm so happy to have you sitting here, but you also represent so many faces and names that maybe people won't know, even after listening tonight, who have had similar experiences or have some aspects of your experience, but they might not ever have their voices heard or their names
True.
known. So I
True.
think it's so important to put a face to the name and to experience of what you're going through and what you're already sharing. It's just, for any age, but then to think as a 17-year-old to be put into that. And from what I understand, you were virtually given no support or contact with anyone as far as family goes, or someone to support you through that process, in that whole 25 hours plus that you were detained and interrogated.
You know, the first 8 hours, the interrogating officers were extremely friendly.
Hmm.
I believe that they had my best interests at heart. Going into the 16th hour, the tone changed. They said that I wasn't coming clean enough,
Hmm.
that I wasn't being truthful with them regarding my involvement with the crime. They said things to me like, we know you did it. We have witnesses that can put you at the crime scene. They told me what they believed happened,
Hmm.
and they then asked me to reiterate the story back to them. As I reiterated the story back to them, they got a confession. Going into the 24th hour, I was nothing more but an empty shell of a child.
Hmm.
I couldn't tell you if it was night or day. They did offer me a cup of water. They brought in a sack lunch, but I had no appetite to eat or drink. I just wanted to go home.
Hmm.
And when the officer said that I would never come out of that room until I told them what they wanted to hear, I believed them. However, what they wanted to hear was a lie.
Hmm.
And that lie cost me 2 decades of my life.
And we'll get to that. The 21 and a half years you were behind bars for a crime you did not commit. But just hearing you talk about that 25 hours, and I was thinking as you were talking, I'm like, you said the first 8 hours, and it's like, what what are they asking you, for obviously the whole time, 25 hours, but I'm wondering, like, what is it, just them trying to tell them things? Is it asking you random things about your life just to like get you talking? How do they talk to you for 25 hours? And I'm sure some of it was them leaving you alone, going, coming back, doing that kind of a thing too, but it just seems incredible, just that amount of time of questioning anyone about anything will drive you kind of crazy. So, which is part of, I think, the strategy is just
Hmm.
to get you all your psychological defenses to come down, feel like you'll do anything to get out of there, like you said, which is often the case. And we'll talk about false confessions in maybe more detail later on. But what were they even asking you in all of that time?
So the first couple hours, they were asking me questions like, what did I do for the day? What was I doing all day? Who was I with?
Hmm.
Where did I go? Who was I hanging out with? And I was truthful. I told them, look, I was hanging with some friends, and these are their names. This is what we did.
Hmm.
I gave them a playlist, point by point. Like, we did this, we did that, we did this, but it wasn't enough. They said, we don't believe you. we do not believe you. And then they would leave, and then they would come back again.
Wow. And that whole time, did they give you any opportunities to contact family, to have a lawyer, any of those kinds of things?
Not at all. I know I may be jumping a little
Sure.
ahead, but in retrospect, um, if I would have said to the interrogating officers, I want my mom, the interrogation would have stopped.
Huh.
It would have stopped immediately because that's a form of me invoking my rights, my Miranda rights.
Mm.
But I didn't know what my rights
Right.
were.
Hmm.
I didn't understand you have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. ...
Hmm.
I didn't understand those key phrases. Unfortunately,
Hmm. And they obviously don't want to give you the idea of that. And I mean, obviously your experience is what you can share about, but from what I've read, they kind of make it seem like they're on your side. Like they're not against you, that you'll even need someone to protect you against them. They're kind of with you. And like you said, the first 8 hours, they were friendly. So they're trying to make you feel like, hey, we have your best interests at heart, not knowing that really they're just trying to get you to say you did something, whether or not they know you did it or not. They want to get you to say, that they have one singular goal and they're just trying to get you there no matter what. So, yeah, you said the first 8 hours they were friendly, kind of. I get the sense making you feel like, look, we're on your side. We're not against you in
true,
any way. We're trying to help you. And I think that's why they even use that type of language, like we're actually here to help you out.
so true, so true.
Um, and then, yeah, I mean, I can only imagine what you had to go through, and then eventually, so yeah, we're gonna probably jump around a lot. But then when you get to that, 25 hours in, what was it? Because I think it's so, for some people, counterintuitive when we hear about false confessions, because people think, how could you possibly, or they think themselves, I would never. That's a very classic thing when we hear about someone in a situation we're not in. We think, I would never do this or do that. So I think for a lot of people, it's shocking to hear that someone would confess to committing a crime as horrible as murder if they didn't do it. So can you, if obviously like 20, 30, however long it was now, but what do you remember about that leading up to it, and how they also, told you about what would happen if you did confess?
That's a great question. And I'm walking down that road again in my mind.
Mm.
And some of the things that reappeared, going through that experience was how they were just taking my innocence away from me.
Mm.
They were painting this picture of me being this this sinister child out there causing havoc. You know,
Hmm.
they said that I was a shot caller. They said that I was this big drug dealer who was mad that this group was infringing on my turf, and that I created a scenario where I wanted to take over this block. And as a result of that, I took a life. This is the picture that they're painting
Hmm.
of me
Hmm.
in the interrogation. And so when I said they were taking my innocence away, when they were like painting this picture of me and saying this is what we believed happened and how I should reiterate this story back to them, I was becoming deflated, you know?
Hmm.
And and I remember that, my whole demeanor started to cave inward.
Mm.
So much so that I remember when I put my head on the table towards the end of that 25-hour ordeal,
Hmm.
I remember I looked up with tears in my eyes and I said, "Okay,
Mm.
what do you want to know?" And then the sergeant said, he slapped the table and he said, "Now we're going to get somewhere.
Mm.
Finally, now we're going to get somewhere."
Oof. I was. That's just. I mean, I was just imagining they distorted the reality to the point where they distorted the reality of who you are. They were convincing you were someone you weren't, but saying it so many times and so often that it seems like at some level it could just distort. Because I've read some stories where people, they kind of question themselves. Not that all that whole story would be true, but you're just like, maybe I was, not that you did the whole thing, but maybe there's some things I'm not remembering. You get into, like, they warp your reality and your sense of what's going on. plus the sleeplessness, disorientation, the shock. Keep promising you, as I think they did with you as well, that if you sign this or if you say you did it, we'll let you go.
That's
Or
right.
did they tell you anything like
Absolutely.
that?
They said, as soon as you tell us what we want to hear, we'll let you go.
Mm.
We'll let you go. And you know what? I believed them.
Yeah.
I believed them. Whether I told them the truth or a lie, I
Mhm.
believed as soon as I tell you what you want to hear,
Right.
you'll let me go home.
Hmm.
But that wasn't the case.
Yeah, and they have so much power. It also reminds me of Stockholm syndrome, where people start to feel sympathy for the person keeping them hostage. They have all the power. They're controlling you, so you believe like whatever they're saying is the truth. They know a truth that I don't know. And I mean, as a 17-year-old, you're in the police department. If they're telling you something's true, you're going to take their word over it over your own. Now it's easy to think I could have known something like that, but of course, if they're saying, "Look, you signed this, you go home, you're good," of course you're going to believe them. So I think, and this is sad. We talked about this before the show. How in most cases, police officers are allowed to lie if they're investigating, interrogating, talking to someone. Say we have evidence or we have witnesses, like they were telling you, just to get. There's basically no rules to it, which is really not okay. And some of what you are working towards is trying to balance things a little bit more to help. Again, as I said at the start the show, so that no other youth would have to go through what you went through to the extent that you went through. And there's some promising new legislation, which we'll talk about in the next segments. Yeah, before we go to break, go ahead.
Can I say something real quick?
Please.
I'll be real quick. Like, we're sitting in this room right now with the AC on,
Mhm.
and I remember when I was in that interrogation room, the AC would be on, and I would remember I would be shaking violently, not because of it being cold, but because I was scared.
That's heartbreaking. I mean, you were a boy, 17, technically not even an adult, and they were just treating you. And it breaks my heart. And I
They
was
were
talking
supposed
you.
to protect and serve,
Yeah.
and they weren't protecting me at all.
Nope. They thought, and in some twisted way they think they're doing something right and good, but missing the bigger picture that justice is about justice, not just about getting a conviction or getting a confession. And unfortunately, that's kind of what was guiding them more than going towards justice. But we'll talk more with Jerome, sharing his story and also what he's done since he was finally released back in 2011. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Again, I'm joined by Jerome Dixon, who is sharing his heartbreaking and inspiring story of what he went through. And we're still, I guess we could say, in the heartbreaking side of what you experienced before the break. You were sharing how you were interrogated for over 25 hours for a murder you did not commit. And we did touch on it about getting to the confession. So what happened then, where they were telling you, look, just tell us you did it and you get to go. But clearly that was not what you experienced.
So true. After I confessed to the crime and they got a written statement from me, as well as a recorded statement from me, my life changed. It completely changed for the worse. And it was at that point, after I signed the confession, after I sealed the deal, it was at that point when I was allowed to finally call home. And this is where it gets interesting, because when I finally called home, my mother picked the phone up and I said, "Mom, it's me, your son, and they have me downtown for murder." My mom said, "Who is this? Is this a joke?" She passed the phone to my sister, and I could hear my mom in the background saying, "There's somebody on the other line playing a joke. That's not my Jerome on the phone." My sister picked the phone up and I said, "It's me, it's Jerome. And they have me downtown for murder."
I don't even know what they were going through. It just shows how they couldn't even believe that it was true. Like your mom couldn't even. She thought you were playing a joke on her or joking around. Clearly, you weren't. And they I don't know how long it took for them to realize how serious what was going what was going on? Did they come to the state? Did they allow them to come see you, or
After
what
the
happened?
fact.
Uh-huh.
My case was also dubbed this title, legally kidnapped. Legally kidnapped. Think about that.
That means the
How could
police?
somebody legally kidnap you?
Wow.
That's what they did to me.
Hmm.
They legally kidnapped me for 25 hours. Now, the courts were saying one thing to my parents,
Hmm.
and then when I would go visit them, when they would come see me, they would get a totally different story. It would be like, well, wait a minute. They said you said this, Jerome. And now I have to convince them, no, look, it's a lie. It's a lie. And, I have to fast forward again,
Yeah.
just a little bit.
Sure.
I was sentenced to the California Youth Authority for first-degree murder, 3 counts of robbery, and assault with a deadly weapon. 6 years, 7 months. That was my term.
Hmm.
I would have been released before my 25th birthday. My public defender at the time said to me, based on my confession, I wouldn't win. And so it would be in my best interest to take this deal. I would be tried as a juvenile. So upon my release, when I turned 25, I would not have an adult record.
Hmm.
So I was transported. I was transferred to the California Youth Authority. It's now the Department of Juvenile Justice. But I was transferred to the DJJ with a 6-year term for first-degree murder, 3 counts of robbery, and assault with a deadly weapon. 6 months into that commitment, I was brought back to court. Now I was a juvenile being tried as an adult. So that 6-year deal was now vacated. I'm now 18 in the adult court being tried as an adult. Now my public defender, a new public defender, is saying to me that the reason why they brought me back and vacated back to court and vacated the 6-year deal was because I had names and whereabouts of my co-defendants. And if I did not cooperate with the district attorney's office, I would go to trial, I would lose, and I would receive the maximum sentence of 50 years to life in prison. This is what they told me. So I went through the whole process again, at which point a deal was put on the table. And that deal was I plead to a lesser, which is second degree murder, and be sentenced to a life sentence of 18 years to life. It was they basically told me to choose my form of cancer. You either choose the 18-year to life deal, or you go to trial. You will lose. This is what my public defender said. You will lose, and you would receive the maximum sentence of 50 years to life in prison. What does an 18-year-old do?
Yeah.
It wasn't like I can consult with my mom or my dad and say, help me. What do I do? I was on the other side of the wall, and I had to make an adult decision as a child. Mind you, I was still a child, even though I had been in the system for a year now. Physically, I was maturing, but mentally, I was still a child. And so I had to make an adult decision. And as sad as this sounds, but I thought 18 years to life was far better than 50 years to life. So I chose the 18-year to life term.
I mean, understandable. I don't know how what other decision you basically had, the way they presented it to you. And with the false confession, that's probably why they were, amongst probably other reasons. But I know that from what I've read, false confession or confessions, they're not going to call it a false confession, but a confession is very powerful when it comes to the court of law, that it's hard to refute that. So having that you verbally said it, you've, signed the confession, they're probably telling you your real options, which were unfair from the beginning. But here you went from thinking, even though it was unfair to begin with, 6 years, but now it's turning into potential life behind bars, which is just, I can't even imagine what you were going through.
So you could now, you see how the system has like started with a small little plant patch. And, as you progress in the system, I got deeper and deeper and deeper into this hole. A lot of people I know there's a lot of people thinking, I would never confess. But let me just show you how easy it is. Watch this. What time did you get up this morning?
I don't know, 8 in the morning.
8 in the morning.
Yeah.
Did you drink some tea?
I had some coffee. Yep.
Okay, some coffee. What else did you do?
I had some breakfast. Then I showered and
Did you make
left
any
it.
phone calls?
Nope, not before I left the house.
Okay. Now watch this. I really feel great
Mhm.
because it took me 25 hours to give a confession, and I just got a
Could I be
confession from you.
Yeah, I
That's
honestly
just
was
how
like,
easy it is.
as you were questioning me in this very obviously, I know there's no consequences. I felt my heart rate go up. I was like, what if I say something wrong? Like, what if I don't say the right thing? So, I mean, I think that's a good, that was maybe, I think it was probably 30 seconds to a minute at
Hey,
tops.
man, I
Yeah.
pat myself on the back.
Yeah. And so I mean, I think that is a good thing to remind people because I think it's so easy to think, I would never. And I always tell people, like, I mean, this is very different, but it's like, I would never stay in a domestically abusive relationship. I would never get addicted to this. I would never this. I would never. And it's just a reminder that you don't really know what you would do until you're in a situation. And if you've never been in that situation, you should actually trust the people that have been through it, that that's probably what you would do too, So if you've never been interrogated for 25 hours, you should assume that we would all do what you did in maybe even less time, if not in 25 hours, and not, especially at 17. Even now, I don't think people really get how intense it is when you're in the, police department, when they're coming in and you're saying the first 8 hours, friendly, but still you're in the police department. Then when they get aggressive and when they're telling you those things, and when they say your only way to leave, basically, I mean, the way it seems they said is, look, you've been here for 25 hours, which feels like an eternity. The only way you're getting out of this room is if you say exactly what we want you to say, and then you get to leave. So it's basically stay here longer, which feels like it could be forever, or just tell us this thing, just say it, it's not a big deal because you're going to go. And so a false confession looks very different when it's presented that way, where it seems like to people, when they hear a false confession, they think someone did something, they have a guilty conscience, they go to the police department and let them know, I did this, I feel so horrible, I have to confess. Confession, even from like a religious kind of thing, it's like confessing to like absolve yourself of guilt,
Right.
which is not at all what we're talking about. This was a confession given to get out of a room that you've been stuck in for 25 hours with promises that this is going to be your way out rather than, unfortunately, your way into something even worse. So, this false confession topic is one that I think is very important for people to even read up more on. We're talking about it now, but to really understand what we're talking about, and that it's not something unfathomable when you really look at the circumstances and understand the human psychology behind it. And that, what you went through, and we're kind of, jumping around in the story, but then because of that, you spent 21 and a half years behind bars. And I mean, obviously, we have a few minutes to the next commercial break, so there's no way to boil that all down into a few minutes, but I'm just wondering what that experience was like. I mean, obviously it's a million different things, I'm sure, but whatever you can share from what you went through, how you kept whatever strength you were able to keep to go through that, I mean, just whatever you could share on that. I mean,
For 21 years, first of all, my family was my mainstay from day one to the present. My family was the backbone that kept me strong. And so, in retrospect, all I had for those 2 decades was the memories that I had with my family. The laughs, the tears. I had to grow up really quick in prison. I never clicked up with a gang. I was known as a non-affiliate, an outsider. And, there was probably 2 words that I uttered through the whole day, and that was, "What's up?" Well, I mean, what else could I say? And so I couldn't go to certain areas of the yard because I wasn't a Crip or Blood. I mean, segregation exists in prison, and if you're not part of one of those subgroups, you can't participate in any of those functions. So a lot of times when they would open up the yard or have programs, I would literally be an outsider walking a track. That was my program for 2 decades. And I mean, it's unfortunate that I went through that, but it's kind of bittersweet.
Mm.
A lot of people find that hard to believe, but it is, because I had to learn really quick, fast, in a hurry how to become a man.
Mm.
I had to grow up, from being this naive, innocent 17-year-old to become a survivor in a dark world. Now, hey, look, I met some good people in prison. I met some bad people in prison. And the lessons that I've learned, whether it be positive or negative, help shape the person that I am today. And I don't believe it or not, I don't have any regrets for
Mm.
going through that experience, for learning, how to be a man. Now, there's something else that needs to be said. My mother would not set foot in the prison system to come visit me because my mother was under the mindset that if her child is innocent and if she goes to visit her child should be walking out with her.
Mm.
That was a reality that my mother was not, that was a reality that my mother couldn't embrace because she knew it wasn't the truth. I didn't understand that going through it, but I understand now as a free person why she did that, and I was devastated.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
I didn't see my mom for 21 and a half years.
Wow. I can't. I'm like speechless. I don't know what to say to that. I think she couldn't maybe seeing you there, and also just want to legitimize you being there in some way. But it's I don't. It goes back to again. You never know what you do to your situation. But
Have you ever prepared for an accident?
exactly. Yeah. You
Have
can't.
you? No, seriously.
That's
Have
right.
you ever prepared for a vehicular accident? I mean, you might put the seatbelt on,
Right.
but you don't know if somebody's going to come up behind you and rear end you. You don't know if somebody's going to come and T-bone you. You don't know.
Hmm.
You can't prepare.
And we're talking about a car accident compared to what you went through. It's like times 1,000. Yeah.
Just to put it in perspective.
Yeah. And that's when you say it's bittersweet. My first hunch would be it's bittersweet in retrospect. I'm sure when you were going through it, it was mostly just the bitter.
I say this all the time. You said bitter. Now, did I have a lot of anger when I was going through that?
Mm.
Absolutely. We're talking about, my sisters being married, my nieces and nephews being born. I graduated inside prison. I was a valedictorian. I thought I was really all of that. My GPA was 3.95, But watch this. Walk with me just for a moment. I missed my 18th birthday, my 21st birthday, the prom I never had,
Mm.
the girlfriend I never had, first girlfriend, the first kiss, all of that was if I could let me just paint this picture for you. Just imagine holding a live grenade.
Mm.
All of those raw emotions capsulized in that live grenade. Like I said, the first car I never had, the first girlfriend, the graduations, those milestone moments,
Mm.
were all inside this live grenade that I had to hold on to for dear life. Because I don't know how I knew this, but I knew that I had to keep this live grenade held tight. Because the moment that I released this live grenade would be the moment that I would explode or implode. So I had to hold this live grenade for dear life for 21 years. I had forgotten how to smile.
Mm.
I didn't realize that I had a beautiful smile until I came home. And I went to the dentist, and the dentist said, you have some beautiful teeth.
Mm.
You should learn how to smile. You even have dimples. Hey, look, I'm blushing right now.
Oh.
And I joke with people all the
Uh-huh.
time, if you don't know how a black man blushes, just imagine, just pick up two little dark cherries and put them together. But I didn't know how to laugh. I had forgotten, mind you, my innocence was robbed from me.
Yeah.
And I had forgotten how to laugh. I didn't have a sense of humor, and I had to relearn all of that. I even had to relearn my family. My family had to relearn me.
Mm.
You want to know that I was trapped in time. even though everybody was growing in the free world, I was stagnated in prison. I was at a halt while everybody else was growing with the changing of time. You know,
Mm.
again, when I got locked up, watch this. Cassette tapes were being phased out by CDs.
Mhm. For our younger listeners, won't even know what you're
Yeah,
talking
you
about right
don't.
now.
Yeah, if you're, I'm sorry, if
But that's how long ago. That's how long ago it was.
you don't,
Yeah.
for the younger audience out there, a cassette tape is a little square box with. No, I'm not.
They've probably seen vintage ones or
Yeah,
something. But yeah.
exact. Wow, vintage.
Yeah.
But cassette tapes are being faded out by CDs, and now we have like, digital. We have a
You
digital
can't even see
download.
it anymore.
You
Yeah.
can't even see it anymore.
Uh huh.
Um, and so I had to relearn how to live. I had to relearn how to smile. I had to relearn how to communicate. I even had to relearn how to look women in their eyes. You couldn't do that in prison.
Mm.
You'll get a serious write-up for looking a woman in her eyes. And again, it's a harsh reality that I had to endure, and I did. And in our next break, I'll let you know what I did with that library.
Yes, and that's what I think. I mean, you had to. I was just saying, you're surviving. You couldn't live in there. You had to survive and get through it to then start living again. But 21 years. That's just. I mean, what was taken from you is incredible. But then what's probably even more incredible, and what we're going to talk about after the break, is what you've done since you were released and all the good that you've done. And that's where when I say it's a heartbreaking and inspiring story, we're going to get to especially the inspiring things that you've done since you've been released. I'm joined by Jerome Dixon. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Again, I'm joined by Jerome Dixon, who is sharing his story about what he went through as a 17-year-old, being interrogated over 25 hours, which led to a false confession. And he served 21 and a half years behind bars for a crime he did not commit. And there's been a lot of pain in what we've shared. And not that it means what you went through in any way became easier, but we're going to get into you finally getting out of jail after 21 and a half years. And first, maybe you can share what led to your release, and then about what it was like getting out after 2+ decades behind bars.
Great question. Number one, for 21 and a half years, I think it's important for everybody to know that I received not one written rule violation infraction. That's unheard of in prison. And the parole board, which governs the release of an individual, a lifer, the parole board had questions. Their response was, Mr. Dixon, how is it that you spent 2 decades in prison and you have not one infraction in your central file? And my response was, well, Commissioner, I don't belong here. I never did. Therefore, I was not going to act like I belong here. And so, fast forward, I appeared before the parole board 6 times. And, 5 of those instances that I appeared before the parole board, they wanted to know, like, what led me to be there. And I was not in a position to talk. My stance was, you know what? You guys aren't going to listen to me. So whatever you see on record, that's what it is. If you guys want to talk, I'm more than willing to talk about what I've been doing since I've been incarcerated and what I plan to do upon my release. As far as me talking about the life crime commitment, you guys are going to dog me out because it was already adjudicated by the court. So I didn't have any legs to stand on when it came to what I was committed for. So at my 5th hearing, the parole board said, Mr. Dixon, you're never going to get out until you come clean. So I received a 3-year denial. A 3-year denial. So at my 6th hearing, I said, okay, you guys want the truth? I laid it out. I laid the truth out to them. I sat before the panel and I told the panel, the commissioning panel, how a 17-year-old kid who didn't have a voice was put in an adult situation. And that adult situation led him to become incarcerated for 21 and a half years. And I told the parole board, I am that young man, and I speak on his behalf. And therefore, if you have any questions that you want to ask that 17-year-old kid, you direct it to me because I speak for him. I am his man now.
Yeah.
And as I explained to the parole board how a 17-year-old kid was put in an adult situation to confess to a crime he didn't do, who is now fighting for his life before them, the parole board went to recess with what I had presented. And when they returned, the parole board said to me, Mr. Dixon, we're sorry that it took us 21 years for us to realize you are in here for something you didn't do. And because of that, I was granted parole and I was released. October 17th, 2011. My second day home, I walked into a law firm. I had a position at a law firm. They gave me a position, which is why I paroled to the LA area. And I know we're pressed for time, but I have to say this, because for the first time I was in corporate America. Watch this. This is how I'm going to show you how I progressed, because this is something that I wanted. My second day out, I walked into a law firm. They gave me a position as an intern, and I'm sitting behind a desk. Mind blown.
Wow.
But I'm living a double life because people are looking at me as if I was a college student. They weren't looking at me as if I was an ex-con. I presented myself very well. I masked my past very well. If you saw me walking down the street, I say this all the time, you never would assume that I just got out of prison after doing 21 years. Why is that? You have to change the narrative. This is one reason why, when I talked about that live grenade, look, that live grenade, when I say it's live, it was live. It had a lot of raw emotion in it. And when they said, Mr. Dixon, get out, go home, I left that live grenade at the door. I said, there's no way that I'm going to walk into this real world and let everybody know how angry I am because of what has happened. You're not responsible for what happened in my past. So why should I inflict that on you? This is the mindset that I had to embrace. This is the pill that I swallowed. And I have to. Because, again, I have to look at everybody as on equal playing fields. Hey, believe it or not, I still believe in the mantra of protecting and serving. I still believe in the police mantra of protecting and serving. I do. I go to the state capitol and I push for prison reform, juvenile reform. I even go back into the institutions. The very institution that held me captive, I went back in there. How crazy is that?
Wow. As a free man.
As a free man with the key. I told him I'm not staying tonight.
Those jokes, they sting too. I feel it like that's like a lot of, but I think maybe sometimes the only thing you can do is try to make light of it to get yourself through it sometimes.
Because I don't want you to be sad at what I went through. I don't want you to be miserable at what I went through. If you get mad at what has happened, then you do something. You change. You change the system. Because I'm doing it. So we could do it together. But I do not want you to be mad at what has happened. I don't want you to be sad at what has happened. I want you to do something about it.
Right.
Again, this is why I'm going back to that intro, to the listening audience, to the parents, put your child in my position, in my shoes. And if that hurts you, then you do something about it.
I think, so it's, in a way it's like you can be mad or be sad if you use that as fuel to action, which I agree. I think that's always the case, right? You see people suffering. If it makes you feel something, don't just let that feeling be in vain. Go do something about it. And that's right. I mean, you were doing that with your own pain. And even, I could probably talk for like 20 minutes straight about what you just shared. So many things you shared were inspiring. From, when you were 38, finally that 17-year-old you got an advocate, and it was you at the age of 38 in front of that parole board. But he deserved an advocate when he was 17, which is what you're trying to make happen now. And what you even said, my past, people who you're interacting with now are not responsible for your past. I wish every human being, we're all trying to strive towards that, because people are like, oh, my parents did this to me. I have these insecurities. I have this. And we all take it out on people around us. So it's a very hard thing to do with people who've had a lot easier history than what you went through in much different circumstances. But an important, I think, lesson that we all have to recognize is what we've been through, our past, that's our history. But what we do with it now, that's up to us. And, for you to be able to say that after what you went through and how it was so unjust, what happened to you, is quite incredible. I'm looking at the time, as I mentioned, and I almost want to, like let people know we likely will have Jerome back sometime soon, because there's so much to your story, including all the great work you're doing, and we're barely going to touch on that. But I
Sure.
do want to make sure in the last 3-4 minutes we have left that you can share. You said, for people to take action, but to share some of the actions you've taken, especially laws that are being passed so that juveniles don't get interrogated without some kind of support or access to a family or an advocate in some way. So, what have you done in that regard?
So, there 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I teamed up with Senator Ricardo Lara, Holly Mitchell, and the Human Rights Watch, as well as the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, and we all presented at the state capitol a juvenile Miranda right bill
Mm,
that protects, a child, in situations that I went through. Again, I said I didn't understand my Miranda rights. There's a lot of children out there that don't understand their Miranda rights. So we presented this bill to state capitol, and it was signed into law, protecting juveniles 16 and under. Well, a couple months ago, that bill was amended, and it now protects individuals 18 and under.
mhm,
And so a couple weeks ago, the Governor Newsom, gave me a call,
mm,
and he signed the bill into law, and
mm.
that was huge for me. That's a huge accomplishment.
Mhm.
Number one, getting a call from the governor.
That's really
You
cool.
know, number two, being acknowledged.
Mhm,
By my name,
mm,
rather than being acknowledged by H64249, which was my prison identification number. I couldn't do anything in the prison system without that number. Everything is identified by that number. And so when he said to me, Jerome Dixon, this is why I'm signing this bill into law, it gave me so much
mm,
confidence and reclaimed authority over my life when he signed that into law. So, I am a part of the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, which is a nonprofit organization that provides a platform for formerly incarcerated men and women to stand on. Again, we're talking about changing the narrative.
mhm,
Don't just look at a person from where they came from, but look at a person for what they're doing now, today. There's not one person that is listening that has never committed a crime,
mhm,
you know? And, here we are today where, what? We're not saying, you shouldn't be punished for the crime, but you know what? If you've committed a crime and if you've made, the right contributions to rectify that crime, then be a better person. And so
mhm.
this is the organization that I'm a part of, that I represent. And
Yeah. And I mean, so the bill, well, and what you just said, I'll just say, you're saying be a better person. And it's about giving people a chance to be a better person, because in so many ways, when people are incarcerated and then released, there's so many challenges they face,
sure,
from getting a job, getting housing, different
sure.
types of things. And so, and getting some kind of support, and an ARC, the Anti Recidivism
Anti-Recidivism Coalition.
Coalition, which maybe we'll have you back to talk about that another
Sure.
time.
Real quick, you know
Yes.
what? We presented 13 bills at the state capitol, and out of those 13 bills, 11 was signed into law. Think
Amazing.
about that.
And I mean, I think that's a great way. I don't want to end, I want to end on that, because, so many people are passionate about social issues, which I think is
Sure,
beautiful.
sure.
And you can tweet about them. Those things aren't bad, but it's about taking the real action to make the changes that you've done a lot already. And like I said, because we're out of time and there's so much to get into, we'll have to have you back on and talk more
Absolutely.
about what
Absolutely.
you've been through and what you've done. But Jerome, I appreciate you for coming, sharing your story. As I said, it's heartbreaking, but inspiring what you went through. I'm glad to have gotten to know you, and I appreciate you sharing your story with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
That was Jerome Dixon. Big thank you to him. Thank you to Amir here in the studio. You've been listening to In Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee. Have a wonderful night.